It's time to cook with Susan Beck. Today I'm going to make for you chicken pot pies, made from scratch, way better than the frozen ones.
Here's a list of the ingredients that we will need today for chicken pot pies.
Now, as I mentioned in the intro, these are homemade chicken pot pies, and they are going to be so much better than this frozen kind. When I first married my husband, he said, "Why don't you ever buy these?" Well, there's a few reasons why I don't care to buy these, and one of those is the ingredient list. There's tripolyphosphate in this, there's dextrose in this, there's calcium chloride and sodium stearate lactylate. All right, not things I really know exactly what they are, and if you have trouble saying the ingredients, it's probably a good sign they're not good for you. And then the whole chicken part of this really kind of bothers me too. We've got cooked chicken roll and mechanically separated chicken. Ugh, I read that on other things too, like some of the chicken nuggets that you can buy. And I don't know, I really just prefer our homegrown chickens for this, or even buying real chicken at the grocery store. So we're going to use this chicken that my husband made on the Big Green Egg. He did a beer can whole chicken 2 nights ago, so I have plenty of chicken left over to use in this recipe. Also, something that I don't really care for in these frozen pot pies is the crust. I don't know, it just doesn't have a whole lot of flavor and it's kind of dense. And so instead, we're going to use this puff pastry that you can buy in the frozen section of your grocery store. It comes in 2 sheets. We will only be using one of those sheets today. So I am letting mine thaw while I get everything else ready to go, and we'll put this to use to make 6 pot pies today. We'll set that off to the side. All right, we have a few other things to set off to the side here as well, including that pot pie that I am not going to eat. We will get started today getting our vegetables ready to go. We will be sauteing those in a nice skillet with 4 tablespoons of butter. So I'm going to get my butter into the pan right away here. Find the edge of the paper. Okay, there we go. I'm just going to cut that into a few pieces and toss it into my pan, and I'll just put it on the stove on low. Alright, well that is melting. I am going to cut up this onion, and I will also peel my carrots for this. Now, this is not the fastest meal to make. I will warn you of that, because after you get this all put together into our little crocks, individual soup bowls here, it does need to go into the refrigerator for a little bit and chill. And so it's a little slow in that process. I would say, you know, if I come home and get started on this, and including that 30 minutes of chilling time, 20 would be good, you know, good enough too. You know, these are going to take me 40 to 50 minutes to put together. Alright, nice small pieces of onion here. Oh, they're making me cry today. You just never know. Some onions do and some onions don't. This one's kind of getting to me a little bit. Alright, and then peel our carrots. And then we'll just chop those into small bite-sized pieces as well. Okay, the onions are chopped, carrots are peeled. We'll just finish chopping up the carrots here, and then we will put them into that melted butter on the stove and allow them to saute for probably, around 6 minutes. We want the onions to start to become a little bit translucent and the carrots to soften up a bit. This one's kind of bigger, so I'm just going to cut it in half this way so that each of those pieces is a little bit more bite-sized. Alright, off to our melted butter we go. The butter's nicely melted. We're going to put in those carrots and onions. just let those saute for a bit. Like I said, probably around 6 minutes or so. I've got that now turned from low heat to medium heat, and I will just stir now and then with a wooden spoon. You can hear that sizzling back there a little bit on that medium heat. I am now going to cut up the chicken into bite-sized pieces. I pulled this off of the bone the night we ate it, let it cool a little bit after supper, and some of the pieces are still pretty good size. Like there's a great big chunk of chicken breast. I've got a lot of breast here, a little bit of thighs. I think one of the legs was still left. So like I said, I'm not really picky about what kind of chicken piece that I use. 2 cups of chicken is really sufficient for this. I probably have a little more than 2 cups of chicken here. You know, this is one of those recipes that how many carrots and how many onions you use or how many peas, you know, you can kind of make it to your liking. And I tend to make this a lot with leftover chicken, so it just kind of depends on what I have. I also noticed I have a chunk of skin here that I do not want in my chicken pot pies, so if there's any skin remaining on your chicken, go ahead and pull that off and chop it up. Time to give our vegetables a stir here. We don't want to forget about those while we're getting our chicken cut up. Now notice I did not put the mushrooms or the peas in yet. In fact, the peas are back in the freezer. I really like to take those directly from the freezer into the pot pies in order to keep them from getting mushy. I don't want them cooking yet. In fact, they can go in right at the last. The mushrooms too, they'll heat in the oven. They really don't need to be cooked since I'm using canned mushrooms today. If I had used fresh mushrooms, I might add those towards the very end of the carrot and onion cooking time. I just want to talk a little bit about chicken again. If you did not have any cooked chicken from leftovers or anything, you would need to get your chicken cooked, and I would probably do that first. I would put a little drizzle of olive oil in this same pan. Don't put the vegetables in yet, and put up your bite-sized pieces of chicken that you cut up in a little bit of olive oil, and just cook them until they turn from that pink color to white color and are cooked through. Then I would remove them from this big skillet and set them to the side, and then continue on like we are doing, sauteing our onions and our carrots. I've mentioned in several of my videos that when it comes to chicken broth, you really have several options. If a recipe calls for chicken broth or chicken stock, you could use a box of chicken broth. It also comes in a can. It's all ready to go. You just open it up and use it, and it lasts for quite a while. This one here, it says on the top that it will last until March of 2022. That's a year now. I can store that for a year, so that's an asset with that type of chicken broth. Another way is to buy this base. You can buy this in little cubes, like little bouillon cubes as well, and you add a teaspoon per cup to make your soup base, or your chicken stock in this case. Otherwise, here is some chicken stock that my husband boiled off of our chickens, and we make it just by taking the carcasses and adding water to those and boiling them till we can remove all the chicken, and then the broth that's left makes excellent soup bases. In this case, it's going to make an excellent chicken pot pie base. This came out of the freezer. It's still got a little chunks of ice in there, as you can see. Sometimes we can it, sometimes we freeze it. But 3 different ways to handle chicken broth or chicken soup base in a recipe. I'm going to add a half a teaspoon of salt and a half a cup of flour and a few shakes of pepper to my onions and carrots. This will be my thickening agent, and it can go directly into the vegetables. And I'm just going to let that flour cook a little bit as it sticks to all of my vegetables. From there, we will be adding 4 cups of chicken broth. I want to add this slowly. I do not want the flour to be lumpy. And as I said, I am going to use today, oops, my burner going back again there. Got that like at medium-high heat now. I'm just going to slowly add a little bit of our homemade chicken stock. And just stir. It's going to get kind of pasty, and I just want to work slowly as I add this. Kind of melting the flour off of the vegetables. Get that to a nice simmer. And a little more, I'm adding, like half a cup at a time. And that flour will make this into our thick base for this soup. And the last can go in. Alright, I just need to get that up to a simmer now. All right, this is starting to bubble a bit here, which is what we want. And that liquid is getting a little bit thicker here. As that continues cooking, I'm going to put in 1.5 teaspoons of thyme. I love thyme. I think it's my favorite herb. I just ordered my seeds, and I'm getting ready to get my garden going here. Well, I can't do it quite yet, especially herbs. I probably got to wait a couple months to put them in the ground, but I do have my seeds ordered. I'm going to go ahead and add in my mushrooms and my chicken. Now that that's starting to thicken, I got a couple mushrooms in there to get out. Alright, here's my 2 cups of chicken, and we'll see how that looks, and I'll decide if I want to use that 3rd cup or not. Again, it's really up to you on your balance of vegetables and chicken. And I'll let that heat just a little bit, and then we'll add the peas. Another reason to make these yourself is that when you make real food, you can control the salt amount that goes in. A pot pie out of the freezer, you get 40% of your recommended daily allowance of salt just in that one little pot pie. And my pot pies will end up being a little bit bigger than those purchased pot pies anyway. And I believe it was like 23% of the fat intake that you are to have in a day comes from just that one pot pie. So keep that in mind. Our puff pastry does have a little bit of fat content. We did add a little bit of salt. If you're using chicken stock from the store, that is high in salt, I must say. So making your own chicken broth would be a way to keep the salt content down. But anytime you're just making real food for your family, it's just so much better for them. Our final step to add that cup of frozen peas. And again, if you don't like peas, don't use peas. Use something else. You could even make these with just the carrots and the onions. Or leave the onions out if your children don't like onions. Oh, that looks really good. It's time to put them into the individual soup bowls. I would recommend tasting your pot pie at this point. Very good flavor. But if you thought it needed a little more salt, a little more thyme, a little more pepper, or something else, this would be the time to put it in. We are now going to ladle our soup mixture into each of our individual soup bowls. Now, you could make this in one big pot and just roll that whole puff pastry out over top of the entire kettle. But I just like having individual servings for this, and I think it's easier to share that puff pastry with everybody when it's cut into 6 pieces to begin with. I have my wooden spoon kind of in the way there as I fill these up. So I usually can get 6 out of this, 5 to 6 servings of pot pie. This last one off here, we're picking it up. Okay, there we go. These are going to go into my refrigerator to sit for at least 20 minutes. I need to get these chilled a little bit before I put the pastry on the top. At this point in the recipe, I have preheated my oven to 375 degrees. I'm going to be getting my puff pastry ready for the tops of these, and then I'm going to just chill them in the refrigerator again for about 15 minutes while my oven finishes heating through. If I did not want to serve these tonight, you really could stop at this point where you have put them into the refrigerator and let them chill. And you could just leave them in there, maybe cover them with some saran wrap since you're not going to cook them right away, and leave them for the next night to put into the oven. So that would be another option if you feel like this is a little bit lengthy for you to get together for a family meal after a day at work or something. All right, so this puff pastry comes in this flat sheet. And the original recipe I saw, I've made a few changes to it along the way, and one of those changes I've made is that I really feel I can get 6 toppings of the, what we would consider the pie crust part of the pot pie out of this. And so to do that, I just take my rolling pin and I just roll it out and make it just a little bit thinner than it originally was. And then I'll just kind of stretch it across the tops of my pot pie. So, because this is nice and softened, it rolls pretty well. Alright, that should be pretty good. And then I'm going to just take a regular knife that I would use at the dinner table and cut it into thirds one way and cut it in half the other direction. So I now have 6 pieces. And I will just be stretching these across the top of each bowl. I do want them to go kind of around the top like it's covering it. I don't want that puff pastry sitting down into the soup part. So over the top it goes. And I will do this with all 6 of these. That piece maybe could be just a little bit bigger to fit well. It's okay if there's some gaps there. It does not have to cover perfectly. In fact, we're going to be putting some steam holes in these, so if that little side slit there is showing, it's really no big deal at all. Stretch that out a little bit as well, just to get it over the top. And this pan, I run out of crocks. I only have 4 nice little soup ones. This here little oven-safe dish is a little bit bigger around. I should have used my largest piece of puff pastry on that one. But we'll make it work if I stretch it well enough. Yeah, there's a gap in the side, but it'll be okay. All right, I'm just gonna take a fork and stick a couple holes in the tops of those just for steam purposes. You do this when you make like an apple pie as well. Trying to do that without pushing it down into the soup mixture again. All right, the next step is to take 1 tablespoon of water along with an egg yolk to put a little wash on the top, and it just helps to make it brown. This part would be optional. There's my tablespoon of water, and all I want is my egg yolk. So I've cracked that, and then I'm just going to go back and forth between each side of the shell here until I'm down to just the yolk. So my yolk is now in with that tablespoon of water. Give it a little beat. You could do this with a fork if you don't have an egg beater. And then my pastry brush works really nicely to put this on the top. Again, this is just to give it a nice shiny and golden brown look, so it's more about the appearance of it than anything to do with the taste. 1 egg from my chickens, of those giant eggs, is more than I will need to cover these pot pies. The last one is in the oven. These will bake. Again, it's 375 degrees for 35 minutes. Well, here I sit with 3 of those gorgeous chicken pot pies. 3 of them are sitting over on the stove that we'll eat tomorrow. But I can't wait to dig in. Now, I will warn you that it's always extremely hot. I usually serve my little baking dishes on a sauce are just to remind people not to touch them, or sometimes you like to just scoop it right out on there and let it cool off well. It just has fabulous flavor. I mean, you just don't get a flavor like that from those frozen ones. I mean, I really don't taste much of anything with the frozen ones. I love the thyme, and the vegetables are perfect, and the best part of all is that flaky puff pastry. Just a real nice lightness without having that heavy doughy pie crust. These are just outstanding, and if you have this, you'll never want another one of those frozen ones again. So I know it takes a little more work to create these pot pies, but I think they are well worth the time and effort. Here's a look at what we will need for today's chicken pot pie.